The courtroom was electric, not with fury but with something rarer, heavier, respect. And that's what made everyone sit up straighter. Because when former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, the ironclad conservative who built her reputation on shredding progressive arguments with surgical precision, leaned forward and said, "Representative Crockett, you're right about that," the entire room forgot how to breathe. What had just happened wasn't a truce. It was a shift in the tectonic plates of American politics. What Pam Bondi, the unflinching prosecutor of courtroom legend, had publicly credited the constitutional wisdom of Jasmine Crockett, the fiery progressive congresswoman known for her fearless questioning and razor intellect. Why? Because for the first time in years, a congressional hearing on judicial independence didn't spiral into chaos. It turned into a masterclass in constitutional philosophy. Who? Crockett, the hero in a blue suit with words like steel. Bondi, the conservative icon with scars from every political war in Washington. How? Through an unexpected moment of mutual respect during a hearing where everyone expected fireworks. When? A Wednesday afternoon that began like any other, until it didn't. Where? The National Judicial Conference, Washington, D.C., the very arena where law meets ideology and sanity goes to die. The tension was immediate. The hearing had been called to address Supreme Court ethical guidelines, a topic so radioactive it could melt microphones. Senators, judges, analysts, all packed into that wood-paneled chamber. Everyone braced for the usual circus, accusations, interruptions, and someone inevitably storming out. But Crockett didn't raise her voice. Instead, she lowered it. "Ms. Bondi," she began, her tone deliberate, calm, surgical. "You and I may stand on opposite sides of the aisle, but we both swore an oath to the same Constitution." That single line, that one calculated acknowledgement of shared duty, shifted the atmosphere instantly. The usual smirks disappeared. Pam Bondi tilted her head, curious. The crowd leaned in. The narrator's voice could almost be heard whispering, "She's not here to fight. She's here to outthink." Crockett continued, "We both know judicial independence isn't a partisan luxury, it's the spine of democracy. But independence without ethics," she paused, letting the words hang like smoke. "That's not strength. That's chaos in a robe." Boom, the first punch, not a jab, but a philosophical uppercut wrapped in reason. And Bondi didn't flinch. She smiled. The kind of smile you give when you realize your opponent is actually worth the duel. But then she spoke, calm, measured, like a general who's seen too many wars to panic. "Representative Crockett," Bondi replied, "you're right that independence without ethics is chaos, but ethics without independence," she leaned forward, "that's tyranny dressed as virtue." The crowd murmured, one half clapped silently, the other half froze. Tension met tension and no one blinked. But here, where Crockett did something no one expected, she didn't argue, she built. "You're absolutely right," she said, nodding. "Our founders didn't design saints, they designed checks. They expected imperfection, and they built a system that forces accountability even on the powerful. The question is who's right, Ms. Bondi. It's whether we're both still loyal to that design." That line detonated online later, replayed millions of times. But in that room, it felt like oxygen flooding back into lungs. Bondi leaned back, studying her like an adversary-turned mirror. And then something almost sacred happened, Pam Bondi agreed. She said, "You remind me of something I tell my law students. The Constitution isn't supposed to flatter us. It's supposed to restrain us. And restraint isn't weakness, it's wisdom." The hearing, meant to be a clash, had turned into a dialogue, one so genuine that even the stenographers slowed down to catch every word. But what happened next shocked the entire courtroom. Pam Bondi did something she'd never done before. She credited a progressive lawmaker. On record. "Representative Crockett," she said, "you're showing this room that conviction doesn't require contempt. That's rare. That's constitutional maturity." It was the legal equivalent of a lightning strike, Phones came out. Cameras zoomed in. You could almost hear history-changing tone. Within hours, the clip went viral, 15 million views and counting. Comment sections filled with disbelief. Bondi praising a Democrat. This feels unreal. We just witnessed sanity trend for the first time in a decade. And yet, it wasn't performative. It was authentic. Because underneath the applause and headlines, something profound had happened. Two women on opposite ideological planets had found the same gravitational pull. The Constitution itself. Let's rewind the why. Pam Bondi isn't known for praise. She built her career on originalism, the belief that the Constitution means what it meant when written. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, treats the Constitution like a living instrument, adaptable, evolving. One sees the founders as guides, the other sees them as groundwork. Yet somehow, between restraint and reform, they found common grammar. How? Crockett had opened the exchange not with a challenge, but with an invitation. She asked, when the founders debated the judiciary, were they designing power or protection? That question wasn't rhetorical, it was strategic. It told Bondi, you're not my target, you're my witness. Bondi's response, they were designing protection from us, from ambition itself. And suddenly, the debate turned into a duet. They spoke of Hamilton's warnings in Federalist 78, Madison's obsession with checks and balances, even Jefferson's grudging acceptance that the court must interpret but never invent law. Each citation was a parry, a counter, a subtle handshake through history. But Crockett's next move was surgical. If the founders feared ambition, she said, then surely they expected judges to fear it too. Independence can't mean immunity. We can't treat robes like armor. Bondi blinked, slow, deliberate, and then with surprising candor replied, maybe not armor, but they need shields. Because the day we turn oversight into overreach, the judiciary stops being independent and starts being obedient. That's when the crowd erupted, not with noise but with awe, because they realized this wasn't a fight between left and right. It was a fight for the middle ground, the rarest battlefield of all. As the hearing wrapped up, Bondi did something no pundit could spin. She stood up and offered her hand. Crockett accepted it, firm, steady, unflinching. That image, captured from 3 angles, became an emblem of something America had almost forgotten: intellectual respect. By evening, law professors across the country were dissecting the exchange. Conservative scholars called it the rebirth of serious dialogue. Progressive ones called it constitutional maturity in action. For once, both were right. Even Bondi's critics had to admit her acknowledgement wasn't weakness. It was strength. The kind that comes from knowing when to stand your ground and when to salute someone else. But this was only the beginning. The viral wave that followed wasn't just digital, it was academic. Clips from their exchange began appearing in constitutional law courses across universities. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and yes, Liberty University too. Professors from both ideological camps began using it as a case study in productive disagreement. Think about that for a second. A progressive congresswoman and a conservative attorney general quoted together in the same syllabus. Meanwhile, the internet did what it does best, remix the moment into memes. One read, "Respect so rare it should be protected under the Endangered Species Act." Another said, "Crockett and Bondi, when IQ meets EQ." But behind the humor, something real was happening. People were starved for authenticity, and they'd just been fed. Pam Bondi, once the prosecutor who dismantled her opponents with precision, was now on cable news saying, "Representative Crockett and I disagree on nearly everything, but she reminded me that disagreement doesn't require disdain." Jasmine Crockett in her post-interview said simply, "Pam Bondi doesn't need to agree with me. She just needs to listen, and she did. That's what democracy sounds like." Cue the mic drop. But of course, the story didn't stop there, it escalated. Within weeks, Bondi invited Crockett to co-present a Federal Judicial Center training module, a platform usually reserved for senior jurists. The topic: constitutional dialogue across divides. Judges, lawyers, and clerks watched in fascination as these two opposites turned debate into bridge building. And when asked why she'd chosen Crockett, Bondi's answer was brutally simple: because she argues like she's defending the system, not just her side. That quote alone redefined the entire conversation. From that day, the two began appearing together on panels, podcasts, and surprisingly late-night talk shows. Viewers couldn't get enough. The chemistry wasn't ideological, it was intellectual. At one point, a host joked, "So, are you two starting the bipartisan Avengers now?" Bondi smirked. "If we are," she said, "she's Captain Constitution." Crockett shot back, "And you're Lady Liberty with a cross-examination degree." The crowd roared. The internet roared louder. And somewhere, buried under the laughter, was the truth. America was watching two brilliant women prove that political intelligence doesn't have to come with emotional illiteracy. But what neither of them realized then was that their partnership was about to ignite something much bigger. Because the Federalist Society, yes, that Federalist Society reached out. And so did the American Constitution Society, their progressive counterpart. Two organizations that had spent decades in ideological Cold War were now collaborating. And the reason: Crockett and Bondi. Their exchange had triggered what law professors began calling the Constitutional Dialogue Project, a joint initiative to teach young lawyers how to debate across ideological lines without losing their humanity. The project's motto: argue, don't annihilate. By now, both Bondi and Crockett were something more than politicians. They were symbols of a system remembering its purpose. And yet, the summit where they would present this idea, that's where the real storm was waiting. Because when the world expects peace, the universe often sends a test.